Hi, Carol
Hello.
Sue.
Hey.
And Kevin or Nancy, we need to make sure we're recording here.
Okay, Ross, I'm done. I'm gonna make you host.
Okay. Hi, Christine. How are you? Christine's on a desert island today.
I wish.
Russ, have you started the recording?
We're now recording. There we go. Now let's see. Are you also co-host?
I'm a co-host now.
You are co-host. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give folks a minute or two to join. There were about 42 or 43 signed up. And some of you are people I know well. Some of you are new faces. Some of you are folks who have been with me on some of my other journeys. And I expect there'll be a friend or two of mine that I have jumping in here from somewhere, because I made a broader invitation to come see this. And at any rate, I want to welcome you all while we're waiting. If you're in a class about a pilgrimage in Italy, you're in the right place. We're gonna go to Italy in a minute, and I'd be there tomorrow if I could, but I can't.
Take me away.
Yeah. While I'm making chit chat, my wife and I fell in love with Italy. We were there for 2 weeks, and we were on foot the whole time. I never had to drive a car, for which I'm very thankful. We saw a lot of cars with lots of dents. We also saw a lot of very narrow streets that I could not possibly figure out. Hey, there's Narelle Campbell from Australia. Hi, Narelle. You're up early, I guess. Must be you're muted.
Hi.
Hi, Narelle. Narelle's my friend from Australia. I met Narelle 3 years ago in Spain on the Camino de Santiago, looking around for a place to get some food or coffee or anything in a village that was strange. What's that?
All we found was each other.
All we found was each other. And one of the mysteries of Spain is you can walk into a village about 11 o'clock and everything's shut up. And I never did understand why. It wasn't siesta time. I just never did figure it out. And no one's ever explained it to me, and that's okay.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this talk. This will be great. This is something I really want to do.
Okay, well,
high on the list.
It's my wife and I will explain this. We were going to go back last year and finish it. And that didn't happen because the epicenter in Europe of the COVID-19 pandemic was Milan, which was just a little bit north of where we were going to start. So, but maybe next year. Does Peter want to walk it with you, Narelle?
He does. He doesn't have the best feet for walking, but he actually would really like to do that one. So, we'll see. Maybe like the Camino, he'll do a bit of it.
That's right. I've become more relaxed about walking, and I walked through Spain 500 miles, and I had the thing that I had to walk the whole way, which is fine. I really did want to walk the whole way and carry my pack the whole way. But when we went back to Italy, as you'll see, we didn't follow it quite to the T. We decided that we were on a pilgrimage, but it wasn't that big a deal if we didn't walk the whole way.
I certainly have changed my way of thinking with that as well. Yeah. I feel exactly the same way. I say that all the time now. I used to walk with, like determination, but now I don't even think about how far I'm going or how fast it is, or I don't have that same sort of determination anymore. I'm just more about being present and enjoying what's happening.
Yep. I feel the same way. Welcome, everyone. I think we probably have as many people as we're going to get. I imagine some more people will drop in. It's nice to see all of you. I was just chatting with my friend Narelle, who is from Australia. So she's already into Friday. And what is it, like 5, 6 a.m. where you are?
6.
6. Okay. That's not too bad. That's doable.
That's all right. Yeah.
Okay.
it's
I see we have Ivy Santiago here. Very nice. Carol, Sue, Mary, Carolyn, Christine, who's I believe out in Seattle, and Diana, Ann, and John. Nice to see Ann and John. Any of you heard any of my other talk about walking the Camino de Santiago?
Oh.
If you did,
Yes,
you can
I
raise
did.
your hand.
I
Or
did.
hey, hi Tracy. No, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm recognizing faces and names. Well, I'm glad because I'm going to be launching a new series starting next week about travel, several series about travel, about different aspects of travel, and destinations at what I call active travel, which is like walking or biking or something like that, and travel tips. And we'll also have some travel groups. So those of you that are part of Get Set Up, keep your eye out for that. There's all sorts of travel opportunities as the world changes and we get chances to travel again. We have a teaching assistant here today named Nancy, who is from India. She's from a part of India that I'd love to visit someday. So we're going to get there, I think. And if you have questions today, you can put them in the chat and Nancy will try to gather those up and ask me those questions. Also, I'll sure at some point I'll pause and you can ask a question. I'm going to give a presentation today similar to the one I did on the Camino de Santiago. And this is new. So you are the beta group. You're the first ones to see how this presentation works. And if I leave out an important detail, you'll all go, hey, Russ, how come we didn't hear about this? I'll go, oh, yeah. Anyone who's familiar with walking the Camino de Santiago knows that pilgrims carry a pilgrim credential. This is my credential for the Way of St. Francis. Credenziale di Pellegrino. So it's in Italian. Sorry if I'm butchering my Italian. There's quite likely an Italian on tonight, and they will probably cringe to hear me speak. I also have a certificate, not unlike the Compostela that you get in if you arrive in Santiago. This one is actually a certificate I got for walking to Assisi. You can also get one for walking to Rome. And I'll explain a little bit of that detail in a minute. And also for those of you who know that when you walk to Santiago, you carry or get a scallop shell or both. The symbol for the Via di, actually the way of, the symbol for a pilgrimage to Rome is the key. But the symbol of Assisi is the Tau cross. And so the one here, the dark one is one that my son gave me years ago, which I've carried on me on pilgrimages. And the lighter one is one I picked up in Assisi. So those are just a few little things I like to show at the beginning before I start presenting, because it's easier for you to see what I'm showing you then. And it's great to have you all. And I'm going to start a presentation here right now about the Way of St. Francis. And hopefully you'll all see something on your screen that says the Way of St. Francis. Is that showing up?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I had a really hard time trying to pick the picture to put here. So Italy is really gorgeous. I'm Russ Eanes, your guide with Get Set Up. I live in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is Western Virginia, or the Shenandoah Valley. I've been here about 10 years. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist, but I formerly was a book publisher. And as a publisher, I really loved helping authors shape their ideas and put them in between the covers of a book. I love all the energy I get and the wisdom I collect from working with older learners like you. So welcome. Glad to have you here. Get Set Up, if for any of you are new, it's a learning organization that helps older adults learn useful things. And it's free. So we learn from each other, and ideally we can see each other with our cameras on. And by the way, you will get an email after this class for follow-up, like to give feedback. And also you can request a recording of this class if you want to watch it again. Anyone who's watching by live stream, the best way to participate in this is to join us. And then you can, if you register for a class, you can join in and ask questions. And lastly, we're not paid to promote any specific products. I may mention a product or two today, but I'm not being paid to promote it. In 2018, I walked 500 miles on the Camino Frances in Spain, the most walked modern Christian pilgrimage route in the world. About 400,000 people walked it in 2018. It took me 5 weeks to walk it. I met my friend Narelle there about, a little over halfway. and her husband joined her, and my wife joined me. This is us in Santiago. And I think this, I don't know, this might have been taken by Narelle for all I know.
I think it was.
I think you took it. So you have credits for this photo. Unfortunately, that day, the cathedral was under reconstruction. The beautiful Western facade had all this scaffolding. I'll get back there someday to see it without the scaffolding. The Way of St. Francis is a 300-mile approximately, or 500K path from Florence to Rome. Most pilgrims walk toward Rome. They start in Florence and they walk to Rome. And Assisi is about halfway, so it's an additional pilgrimage destination. Actually, Assisi itself is a very famous pilgrimage destination. It is the birthplace and home of St. Francis of Assisi. And I've had a lifelong adult fascination and interest in St. Francis, and I've always wanted to get to Assisi. My wife and I decided to do this a bit differently. We only had a few weeks. We couldn't walk the whole thing. And looking over the map, I said, hey, why don't we walk to Assisi? But instead of going north to south, like from Florence to Rome or part of that, we decided to start in the city of Rieti and walk to Assisi. That's going to take us about a week or so. So we were walking south to north. You can see in this photo right here, this blue and yellow blaze is the symbol of the Way of St. Francis. The route is marked with signs, those yellow and blue blazes, and the key symbol. So if you look up here in the upper left-hand corner of this photo, there's these keys, a yellow and a white key. The key is the traditional symbol of pilgrimage to Rome, much like the scallop shell in Spain. Our plan in 2020 was to return and complete the journey, and obviously that didn't happen. The signage is pretty well marked for those of you that are hikers or trekkers. We were, however, going the opposite direction, so sometimes we missed marks. Also, some of these nice bright blue signs or bright yellow signs were completely washed out by the sun, and so we couldn't see them. However, we did find our way, and we never really got lost. I'm going to give you a little idea of a map here. So this is central Italy, and the Way of St. Francis isn't a traditional old pilgrimage path. It isn't even a single path, which makes it a little bit confusing. So the Camino Frances through northern Spain is a traditional path that's been there for well over 1,000 years, as well as many other paths or ways to get to Santiago. But the Way of St. Francis is actually a modern sort of idea of a route. And there are multiple routes that start in Florence or south of Florence that go all or part of the way to Rome. And they all overlap with each other. And what can get a little confusing is each of those routes can have their own marking. So actually, the key symbol was one of those routes, and the yellow and blue blaze is another one of those routes. Also in Europe, something that's very common is many of the kind of traditional pilgrimage routes or things we think of like that are national hiking trails, and they have a number and sometimes a mark. So we found ourselves having to juggle all these different signages, but just understanding that if we found one of them, it was on the route. But if you look at these, you'll see they're not all exactly following the same way. They're a little bit different. And why did we decide to go from Rome to Rieti and the walk from Rieti to Assisi? Well, the answer is, after looking over the whole route and seeing how hard it was in different places, this looked like an easier section. Now, I say easier because I think the easiest is from Rieti to Rome. But as I looked at it, I could say, well, you know what? Those are absolutely gorgeous towns and cities that you walk through. And I had not been to Italy before. And I wanted to have a chance to kind of see what that part of Italy looked like. So we decided to choose that route, and we flew to Rome, and we took a train, a couple trains to get to Rieti, and then set out the next day along the route that's marked in red here, and kind of zigzagged our way up to Assisi. Now, we used as a guidebook Sandy Brown's book, published by Cicerone Press. Sandy's a friend now. I've gotten to know him since I met him about the Walking the Way. His guidebook is written to go north to south. So that meant that as we followed the guidebook and looked at each stage in the guidebook, we were going backwards, which is And a lot of Sandy's book is written like, you go out of the town 100 meters, you come to the White House with a dog and you turn right. Well, that doesn't work when you're going the other way. So we did our best to navigate it. The information that Sandy gave about the cities and towns was very accurate. And so we found our way without any problem, but it was kind of interesting navigating it in the opposite direction. We flew to Rome, and in case anyone doesn't know this, the Rome airport is not in downtown Rome. It is, I think, 40 miles west of Rome. I'm not sure if I've got my distance exactly right, but it's a hike, and you have to take a train or a bus. And you know how I figured out how to take the, well, I found information about the train and the bus. And then I just looked up a YouTube video about how to find the train and bus terminals outside of the airport. And there was exactly how they showed me in the YouTube video. You come out the front door and turn right, and you go about 100 meters and you find yourself at the bus station. The bus there's a very high speed train. It's more expensive. Since we were on an overnight or red eye flight, and we had till early afternoon to catch our train, there was no point in being a hurry taking the much more expensive train. We in fact just took a bus, which took us, I don't know, about an hour and a quarter to get. But you're arriving in Rome, and suddenly there's the Colosseum, and it's like, whoa, there's this famous thing, and just the cars whizzing by. So this was our first sight of Rome. And then we took a couple trains. We actually walked from one train station to another in Rome, which was kind of fun. We got to see a bit of the city, got a bit out of the tourist areas. And then we took it to this town of Rieti. And this is some of the kind of classical Italian architecture and the mountains everywhere, because we were going to be walking through Umbria, which is mountainous. So if you know Italy has a spine of mountains, the going up and down the Apennines. And if I got those mountain range right, maybe the Apennines are northern. Anyway, there's a range of mountains up and down that boot of Italy. And Rieti is considered the dead center of Italy. There's a mark in the center of the town that says this is the exact center of Italy. So for what it's worth, we started in the center of Italy. We got a guest apartment for the night and started out the next day at the cathedral. There's Jane all geared up with our backpacks. We carried about 12 or 13 pounds. We carried less than we did on the Camino de Santiago because we were not carrying sleeping bags. We were going to stay in hotels or guest accommodations, guest houses the whole way, which made us able to travel a little bit lighter, except for that I decided to bring along a laptop, which added some extra weight. I since decided I'll never do that again. Any of you who've walked long distances know that actually after you've gone 5 or 10 or 15 miles, those extra pound or two matters. And there's our feet together starting our pilgrimage. We like to do this as the traditional pilgrimage starting point, both carrying walking poles. Anybody who has trekked long distances knows that poles are great. They take about 30% of the pressure off of your joints, which if you have older joints like I do, that's really nice. And also if you're on rough terrain or slippery terrain, they can keep you from falling. So I'm a big pole walker. I would walk everywhere around town with my poles, except for I guess I'd look a little bit silly in the city of Harrisonburg walking around with poles, but should I really care? The first day out here on the left was a much more remote route. We walked through some forests and of course packed our own lunch. Isn't that an unusual little loaf we picked up at a bakery heading out of Assisi? One of the things my wife and I enjoy doing when we're traveling is shop for our own food. So we shopped in a bakery and got some cheeses and breads and packed a nice lunch with some fruit that we could stop and eat along the way. Our first stop that day was the town of Buggio Pustone. And this is not Buggio Pustone. This is the town before Buggio Pustone. And this just gives you an idea of what you travel through when you're going through Italy. Town after town clinging to a mountainside, impossibly. At least it seemed impossible to me how they cling to the mountainsides. This was the town just before Buggio Pustoni, and we actually entered at the very top of this town, and then you take stairs all the way to the bottom of that town. And I'm not pulling up immediately the name of that town, but I'll find it in a second. It is Cantalice is the name of this town. It's beautiful. And the only thing I wish I'd done was climbed all the way to the top of that church to have the view. We walked on, that's Cantalice from a little bit farther distance. Again, just how do these towns and cities cling to these mountainsides was beyond me. We saw one after another. The route then, the rest of the way to Poggio Bustoni was pretty steep. And in fact, we just my wife pointing out, like, there's another one of those towns clinging to the mountainside. We got to go all the way up there. So we were almost there. We were only maybe a kilometer away, but it was some pretty steep climbing, marked with the Tau cross for the symbol of Assisi. Poggio Bustoni was a town that St. Francis visited. So part of the connection of the way of St. Francis is that it connects towns and villages that are famous for things that happen in the life of St. Francis. And Poggio Bustoni was one of his favorite villages. There's a great story about him coming down from his hermitage above it, and I'll show you a picture of the hermitage, and kind of having an experience of conversion, of God's presence in his life, and bursting out to the villagers. Buongiorno, gente. I forget the term in Italian. It's anyway, good morning, people. And that's why he loved this town. Again, impossibly clinging to the mountainsides. There it is in the sunset. Just can't, you can see how high these mountains are around it. Fortunately, we didn't have to climb over these mountains. We just had to climb around them. And in the morning, we looked out our window, and the entire valley that we just, because the city of Rieti is over here at this edge of the valley, everything completely under a cloud. So we were sitting up above the clouds. We did change our plans slightly, and I'll explain that in a second. The second day, instead of hiking on to the next stage to Piedalucco, we decided to change our plans. I'll explain that in a second. But because we changed our plans, we took a few hours and we hiked straight up the mountain about a kilometer and a half to this famous hermitage that St. Francis had. In his time, it was a cave, and eventually was built out into this chapel. And it's a very beautiful, very remote spot with a fabulous view of the valley below it. Because we were going backwards from the guidebook, I looked at it and I said, it's a pretty long walk the next day, and there aren't any facilities for quite a long way in between. We're going to be going through basically just forest, and we weren't sure where we could get lunch or buy food. So we said, you know what? It was a rough first day. I think we walked about 22 kilometers, and it was very, very hilly. Those that have walked the Camino de Santiago, there are many sections of the Via di Francesco which are like the day you cross over the Pyrenees. It's that rough. There's lots of climbing, and lots of going up and down. So it's much more challenging than the Camino. So because it had been so challenging the day before, and the next day was challenging, we said, hey, we're on a pilgrimage to Assisi. Why don't we just take a train to the next place? And so we grabbed a bus out of Poggio Bustoni, and we went back to Rieti and got on a train and went to a town a little past where we were going to go. And then we walked backward about 6 or 8 kilometers. So we walked some of the path twice to the town of Piedalucco, which is a beautiful lake, again, kind of with mountains and hills all around it. Again, the Italian villages are just so charming, they'll kill you. And there's Jane down there. Another one of those towns built up on a hillside, but the hillside ends at a lake at the bottom. And the next morning we took off from Piedalucco, and we walked about 25 kilometers, which was our longest day, to a place called, let me pull up the name here real quick. Macaneno. So this was a challenging walk this day as well, because it was 25 kilometers, and a few kilometers out, we met another American going the other way. So we met a lot of people coming toward us because they were walking that north to south route toward Rome. So we had a nice chat with her. And a lot of the day was walking up a river valley. So the road was long, but it was flat. and nice wide path like this, a gravel road, very comfortable for walking and passing kind of one little hilltop Italian town after another, with the mountains ringing us on both sides. Sometimes, you can see again the hilltop towns, and some of them quite dramatic, built on top of cliffs like that one. And then make sure I get my arrows going. And then we had one of the most interesting encounters of our trip, and this was on our third day of walking. Coming toward us were two women, and my wife can't meet anyone without chatting for a bit. She's never met a stranger in her life, so we stopped and talked. Turned out the two women were from Germany, and the woman on the left was the younger one of the two, and the one in the center was the older one of the two. They were carrying about 11 to 12 kilos, or maybe a little bit more, which is a lot. If you've walked a distance, that's a pretty heavy pack. In pounds, that's approaching 24, 25 pounds. And the woman on the left was 76, and the woman in the middle was 80. And I often show this photo to older folks who think that you're too old to do something. And I said, these women they were quite a bit older than me, and they were walking with heavier packs, and they do this a lot. So we were very impressed and inspired by these two women. I don't remember their name. I'll have to ask my wife if she remembers their names. But it was a great encounter, one of many people that we met along the way, and I like to stop and take pictures of them. Going through this valley, as through many, because we were walking in September. I forgot to tell you all when I walked it. We started the last week of September and finished the first week of October. See, important detail I left out. When I walked in Spain in 2018, I was walking like Narelle in early April, and the vineyards, which are everywhere, were just budding out. Well, by the time we walked through the vineyards in Italy in late September, they were full of grapes like this. The other thing we saw lots and lots of along the way were olive groves. Central Italy, the valleys as well as the mountains are full of olive groves, and the olive is a lovely tree. I managed to get a picture of what some of the green ones looked like, so they weren't quite ready for harvesting, but I think about 4 or 5 days later, I did come across a few black ones that were ready for harvesting in another village. Again, just these hilltop towns with castles above them, for protection. We saw a lot of tomatoes, and I thought this was a pretty interesting way they staked up their tomatoes on these little teepees. And after a night in a hotel in Macarena, which was a very relaxing, very nice place, eating pizza and being one of the few foreign tourists there, we set out the next day for Spoleto. Now, this was a day we had to cross a mountain range. And again, for those of you that have walked the Camino de Santiago and know what crossing the Pyrenees is like, this is that challenging, if not more challenging. I'm sure we climbed over 1,000 kilometers, and we turned off the river valley we were on, and we started heading up toward the mountains, toward a pass in the mountains. And you can see the way got pretty rocky and pretty steep. And you can see over here that the path also gets very narrow, and it's dropping off pretty steeply on one side. We made a mistake. I thought there would be more places along the way to get water, and there weren't. So by the time we met these two women, as we were just entering the mountain and about 4 kilometers or maybe 6 kilometers from the pass, we were just about out of water. And the maps and all the things we thought we saw for facilities just didn't add up. And so we were about out of water. And we met these two American women from the Midwest, a mother and her daughter. And they were completing their walk. They just had a few kilometers to walk down to a place they were going to stay. And they had one of these camelbacks with a lot of water in it. And they said, we don't need all this water and would you like some? Boy, did we want some. So we each got about 1 liter of water for them, or maybe more, which was plenty for us to continue on our walk. So this is one of these chance encounters that I was so grateful for, because otherwise we would have been trying to cross probably the hardest part of the climb that day and the walk with little or no water. We did manage to get to the city of Spoleto, which is a beautiful city. That was a long day. I think it was 22 kilometers plus climbing. We did not walk all the way because it was much rougher than we anticipated and harder. We got into a town about 4 kilometers away. It's actually an old medieval Benedictine convent, and it was getting on to dark, and we thought, I don't know, we've got to walk at least another hour. And there is a viaduct over the valley that connects Spoleto to the mountain on the other side where we were, and that was closed. So we realized we were going to have to walk an extra several kilometers to get to Spoleto, and that was a long way. And we were pretty bushed. And as I said earlier, we decided that we were on a pilgrimage. The point was to get there. We didn't have to walk every step of the way. And so I don't know much Italian other than the basic phrases. Neither does my wife, but she's got pretty good Spanish. And so she found that she could cobble together enough Spanish that sounded like Italian that she could ask someone if there was a bus coming. And there was a bus, but it was like an hour and a half later. And we thought, okay, well, I guess we can wait here an hour and a half for the bus. Well, about 5 minutes later, the same woman who had pointed out where the bus stop was to us came up and said, hey, there's this couple over here. They're going to Spoleto. They could give you a ride. So we met this young couple with a boy, and he spoke pretty good English. And they showed us all around this mountain convent. It was a beautiful spot. And then they gave us a ride to Spoleto, and we arrived in Spoleto in a car just at dusk, and found our way to our guest apartment. So again, as a pilgrimage, we were on the way. We were okay, but not having to walk that whole way. And this is the cathedral in Spoleto, which is a beautiful city and a beautiful site. Spoleto is known worldwide as a center of the arts, and they have arts and music festivals. And so we had already decided we were going to take a day there to rest and to look around Spoleto. And I'm really glad we did, because we spent the next day exploring the city, and we really enjoyed our time there. And I would recommend to anyone going along the way, if you can spend an extra day in Spoleto or maybe take a shorter route in or out of there, it's really worth it. This is that viaduct, which is gorgeous. And this is the other side where we were over here, and we were up farther up the mountainside. This was how we thought we were going to get into the city, and it was closed. So we would have had to walk several kilometers down the hill the other way. Our first day in Spoleto, we met another one of those delightful Italian families. We were just coming out of our guest apartment, and the woman spotted something that I don't know what I had that had shown that I'd she spotted my buff that had the Camino on it. She said, "Oh, the Camino to Santiago," and they said how much she wanted to walk to Santiago someday. And we chatted with them for a few minutes, kind of somewhere between Italian and Spanish and English. And they had 2 children and their cute dog, and we got a picture. We just love the Italians. Very, very friendly people. That evening, the day we took off in Spoleto, we met these 2 women. These were Americans. They were some women that we had gotten to know through Facebook. There's a Camino, there's a Via di Francesco Facebook group, and we're a member of it. And we just told people where we're going. And Stacy, the woman on the left, said, "Hey, I'm going to be walking it from Florence to Rome. Let's try to meet along the way." And we kind of kept in touch and discovered, hey, we'll be in Spoleto the same evening. And so we had a very delightful evening meal with them. And because I love to show this, those of you who've walked Spain know that one of the big highlights is the second breakfast you can eat. And you can find a nice chocolate, some pastry with chocolate on it, and a cafe con leche. And they don't have cafe con leche in Italy. They just have a cappuccino. Plenty good for me. And I love stopping for a cappuccino mid-morning. Leaving Spoleto, we walked through a series of mountaintop towns. This is Trevi. And you can see the path was pretty easy going, but then we've got to walk up into Trevi. I loved Trevi. It was less touristy than Spoleto or the town we went to the next day, which is Spello or Assisi. And I really enjoyed it because we were there on a Sunday evening, And there's a plaza up at the top of the town. Here's one of the two plazas, and everybody in the town seemed to be out on the plaza on Sunday evening, just enjoying one another. I just love being able to be with the locals and be at the place where they are and doing the things that they do. The next day we walked from Spoleto from Trevi to Spello, and then we met a big big group of pilgrims. They were all European. A lot of them were Italian, and they were all walking with dogs.
Yeah.
One thing you see along the way, which is true in the Camino Frances, and is maybe even more true along these various old routes and roads in Umbria or in places of Italy, is little roadside chapels and shrines. This is a very typical one that I must pass several of these every day. There's also very small shrines in places. And there we are approaching the town of Spello. And Spello is like a Trevi in many of these towns, is very old. This is a Roman, an entrance from the time of the Romans. So I think this was a first century entrance to the city, or the arch. Spello is known for its flower festival, and they do this thing where they do art murals on the ground made with flower petals. And so the whole city, even though we weren't there on the weekend of the flower festival, there's flowers hanging everywhere. Spello was almost too beautiful of flowers. I mean, it was just overwhelming. Street after street, these narrow Italian streets with flowers. Of course, you will see a car drive down these streets, and they are what I call impossible streets. Of course, they have small cars. And by the way, they don't hesitate to pass people. So make sure you pull over to the side and pull in your toes. This is a view back up the valley from Spello, just a gorgeous town. And the next day we left Spello for our destination of this pilgrimage, which was Assisi. Just to mention, our plan, had we done it last year, was to start in Florence and walk to Assisi. So we would have ended in the same place as we started before. Assisi is up in the mountains. And around midday, we arrived in Assisi. This is the archway showing our entrance into Assisi. And of course, we always like to get a picture of our feet when we've arrived. We take a picture of our feet when we leave and a picture of our feet when we arrive. And here's a great shot of my foot. I'm a big advocate for trekking in sandals. I wear Chacos, and of course, they leave the famous Z pattern on your foot. I have nearly flat feet, and I have to put inserts into my walking shoes. And Chacos have triple arch supports, and they are the most comfortable thing I've ever worn. And I discovered when I trekked for a week in Italy with my Chacos on, that at the end of the day, my feet never hurt. And when I was walking in Spain, my feet always hurt at the end of every day. They were fine the next morning, but they hurt at the end of every day. Oops, I went a little too fast there. So this is a view from up in Assisi, again, looking back down the valley towards Spello and Foligno and Trevi. Assisi is a fairly sizable town. It's beautiful. You can see over here one of the famous cathedrals and churches, and it's full of them. It's very ancient. Assisi was a town already in the time of the Romans, and there's a famous church in Assisi that has columns out front, which are part of a Roman building. This is the cathedral, or the Basilica of St.Francis. And like all good pilgrims, we went to a pilgrim mass the night that we arrived. And I had shown you my credential. We did try to get stamps all along the way in our credential. Not quite as easy to do in Italy as it is to do in Spain, where you can get multiple stamps a day. And I handed them my credential, and that's where they gave me my certificate, showing that we had walked at least 100 kilometers to Assisi. I always love to show a picture of where I have coffee in the morning. This is the little deck. We stayed in the guest apartment, and it looked way out into the mountains. We were right on the north edge of the town, actually, just a little bit outside the old city walls. And of course, meals. I love to eat, show pictures of my meals. There's a typical, looks like a lentil soup. Assisi has a big castle above it. And so you can walk up to the castle. We didn't go in it. We just walked up to it. And one of the fabulous sights in Assisi. There are many, but there is this church where Francis received his vision from God to rebuild the church, and that's about a kilometer below the city. And we stopped there. Nancy, was there a question for something at this point? I will have time for more questions later, but go ahead, Nancy. Yes.
Can you put in the chat how to spell those sandals? Because I have just as flat feet as you do, Russ, and they get tired.
Carol Sue, I'll do that. I'll send you that in the notes later. Yep. Chacos. Assisi is a big pilgrimage destination, and it can be a bit touristy. But we found this church where the original church to be a very delightful spot, not quite as touristy. We happened to be there on October 4th, which is the feast day of St. Francis. And so the night before and the next day, there were parades going through town celebrating the day. And so we managed to get quite a few shots of the parade going through, people in medieval garb. Now, this is an interesting thing. So if you go about 4 or 5 kilometers below Assisi, so Assisi's up on a mountainside, and there's a big, broad, flat plain below there, and that's where we were going to catch our train to go back to Rome. There is this little church is inside a big basilica. And I'm not Catholic, and so but this is an unusual thing. This was the little portion which was the original home church or location of Francis and his brothers Minor. So just this little church. And after he died, he became a saint. They built a basilica over the church. So it is a little bit of an unusual thing to see an enormous basilica built over a tiny little church, especially if you know the life of St. Francis and his emphasis on simplicity. To wind up our trip, we took a train back to Rome. And of course, you can't be in Italy and flying in and out of Rome without spending a couple days in Rome. We were there in early October. This is the Spanish Steps. Rome was very crowded in October. I'm not sure when Rome is not crowded outside of a pandemic. Maybe less crowded in January than it is in October, but we were there with lots of crowds in October. Visited some of the famous sites, St. Peter's Square, the Spanish Steps, and some other places. And as we always do, we kind of scouted out in advance a place where there would be some local markets. So this is a local market on the west side of the town. And one of my favorite things to do when I travel is to go to the local markets. They're not held every day necessarily, and you can shop in stalls. Some of the local markets are very much oriented toward tourists. Others are local markets that the locals go to, and those are the ones we always try to find. Now, before I say anything more, let me pause, since I've kind of been saying a lot, and ask if there's some questions. I don't know if there've been any put in the chat we could look at.
I don't have a question, Russ, but I have a comment. I was there in Assisi in 2013. I've only been there once, and of course we didn't walk, we were driven. But it is a beautiful, beautiful place, and I really cherish the experience because it was really a spiritual experience.
It really is. And for Carol Sue, I put Chaco sandals in the chat. And Lori Ferris, who's a friend of mine on Facebook, has kindly reminded me that Sandy Brown, the author of the guidebook and who is also a friend of mine now, is now walking the California Mission Trail, 800 miles through California. You can't keep Sandy down. Sandy is known for leading tour groups on pilgrimage along this route in Italy.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm in the planning stages for the Via San Francesco right now, and I'm debating if I should do La Verna to Assisi or Assisi to Rieti. Which section was the most challenging for you between Assisi and Rieti?
You know, I'll tell you something, Diana. It would probably be easier to go from Assisi to Rieti than the way I went. And the reason is Some of the stretches that are more remote, there is an easy stopping place going part way, say if you're going north to south. So if you want to stop somewhere for lunch or forget a market, it's a little bit easier going that direction.
North to south, yes.
And Laverna would be beautiful. My hope someday is to walk soon. This year, next year, is to walk from Florence through Laverne to Assisi.
Yeah, I'm planning it for September of this year. I live in Italy.
I knew there were some people from Italy joining you today.
I just did the Via Francigena last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Via di Francigena is a route that goes from Canterbury, England to Rome, and it goes through Tuscany. So it goes farther west than the Via, and it is a very old pilgrimage route. It's also very long. It's probably
gorgeous.
Maybe 1,200 miles. It's very long.
Yeah. I did only 700 kilometers. I didn't do the entire thing.
I enjoy your only 700 kilometers. Very good.
So now, but for you, which section was the most challenging between Rieti and Assisi?
The most challenging is between Spoleto and wherever you end up the next day. Probably if you go to Macaneno or Arone, only because of crossing the mountain. But see, if you're going that direction, you cross the mountain very first and kind of get that out of your way. So, but it's very doable.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second here, and so I can see everybody. And let me ask, because I was going to do this at the beginning and I forgot, the show of hands. Anybody that's walked all or part of the Via di Francesco here, you can put up your real hand or put up a virtual hand if you've walked it. And if you haven't walked it, anybody that has thought of walking it before you heard about it today. Narelle has, yep. And hi, Lori. Yes, I know. Okay, fabulous. And I'm so glad that we had someone from Italy, because I had people asking, I'm a part of the Facebook group about the Way of St. Francis, and I posted that this talk would be happening then.
That's where I saw it.
Excellent, Diana. And I want to make sure people could attend. It is a lovely route. Someone asked about the cost. If you have walked the Camino Frances, you know that you can probably get away with about 30 or 35 euros a day if you're staying in the albergues, which I enjoyed staying in. Hotels would cost you more. The Way of St. Francis is different. There are a few hostels or I'm not sure what the Italians call them. Diana, can you remind me what that is in Italian?
Albergues.
Albergues. Okay. There are a few along the way, and I would enjoy staying some of those. There actually is one in Poggio Bustone that look very interesting to stay in. There are still some monastic orders that run monasteries that take in pilgrims. So if you have a guidebook, you will see those listed. There is also Sandy Brown has very nicely compiled a spreadsheet of all the lodging along this route. So, and it'll say, the type of lodging it is and maybe even the cost. One of the differences here is that it is more expensive. So if you were planning on 30 to 35 euros a day per person, I would plan more on 50 to 60 per day per person, which is still very affordable and very fun, by the way, if you're walking. And if you want the experience, try to find some of those monasteries that you can stay in. I think those are just really unique experiences. Oh, Diana, one other thing I was going to mention, when you are going south from Assisi to Spello, there are two routes. One goes up through his hermitage on the side of the mountain, and we took the easier route that goes lower down. Next time, if I do it, I would go the other direction and go up in the mountain and see his hermitage.
Can I just add something regarding the accommodation? Because of COVID and because there are hardly any pilgrims in Italy right now, lots of places are closed.
Yes.
And of course, everything needs to be pre-booked in advance. You can't just show up at the doorstep anymore.
Well, and that was even true when we were there before this. What we did was we generally, now I made it what I consider to be a bit of a mistake. I booked all my lodging in advance. And what I would do next time is I would just book it a day in advance.
Mhm.
And you can call, you can email the place where you want to go. We use booking.com, which I think would have worked in Italy just fine. While we were in Italy, basically just you can book your lodging the day in advance. And I wish I'd done that, because then I didn't have to worry about, hey, I have to be in this town tomorrow if you want to slow down and do something different. Those that have walked the Camino Frances know that basically you could just show up. And that's one of the wonderful things about it. You don't have to make plans. And if you're a modern Westerner, I think Australians count as modern Westerners. We like the idea of like being free of plans and schedules.
But because of the pandemic, that's not possible anymore.
That's
Everything
not possible.
has changed.
Yep. No, so nice to have you here, Diana, someone from Italy. I was hoping we'd have someone. More questions on anything. Anybody here who's walked the Camino Frances or any of the Caminos to Santiago? Oh, great. Anne and John, fabulous. Well, you might find this very interesting. This was my wife and I actually thought about walking this before we went to the Camino de Santiago, but changed our minds. Let's see. I had one question here. Somebody had a hand raised. No, the hand went down. Okay. Feel free to ask questions.
Russ,
Yes, Christine.
I put in the chat, I'd love to follow you on Facebook. I just did a search, but couldn't find you. What state are you in?
I'm in Virginia.
Yeah, no, you didn't come up. So, are you on Instagram?
I'm not, but you can find me on Facebook. If you search my name, I'm sure you'll find me, but also I'll connect with you later, Christine.
Oh, it's an N, not an M. I put an M in, so I spelled it wrong.
That'll do it. Yes, follow me on Facebook. I hope to get back there to do this journey. I am starting a travel series, actually several travel series with Get Set Up. They will be at different times of day. So some will be in the evenings at 7:30 Eastern time, which means that those of you in Australia, like Narelle, can jump on and see what that evening's travel series is about. We'll be talking about destinations. We'll be talking about travel tips and about active travel. We'll also be doing some in early afternoon Eastern Standard Time, which will allow some people in Europe, either in UK or the continent, to join into our classes. And so there'll be various times. And if you check out on the Get Set Up website, you should be able to be notified when my classes are. But they'll be starting probably next week and the week after, very regular times. So you can find them every week. And I've done lots of kinds of walks and treks. Probably the next thing I'm going to talk about that I've done is the bike trip I took last year from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. on the Great Allegheny Passage and the Sino Towpath, 335 miles on a rails to trails, fabulous trip. But I also will be talking about some of the other places I've trekked and walked, mostly in Europe, some in Colombia, but mostly in Europe. Someday I'll get to Australia. My friend Narelle is always showing up fabulous places that she's been to. In Australia. Let's see. Someone asked about the average cost and about booking accommodations. And I think we answered the best thing to do. This year, we're coming out of COVID. Everything is different. Perhaps in a year or two, there'll be some type of normal. We don't know what it'll be. But as I mentioned before, the best way to do it in Italy is to have the list of where you could stay and then notify them the day before. Someone asked if I walked any pilgrimages in the US. I have not, but I have a couple I'm really interested in. And if you go on Facebook, there is a Selma to Montgomery Facebook group of people that are now walking this famous civil rights route where there was a very famous confrontation in 1965, Selma to Montgomery, and it's becoming a thing now. And I would like to go down there and walk Selma to Montgomery. It's about 57 miles or something like that. Take a couple days to do that. Christine asked if I spent any time in France. Yes, I have, and I love France. One of the evenings I'll be talking a little bit about some of the wine regions in France, in Alsace and in Burgundy.
Have you done hikes in France?
I have done some hikes in France, yes. And
I'd
by
love
the way,
to see that.
those who know about the Camino Frances or the Camino de Santiago know that there are several routes that cross France. So you can double your 500 miles and start out in Paris or somewhere like that, or Vizela, and walk to Santiago. Someone asked, how much did I prepare with local walking before I go? So before I went on the Camino and before I went on this, I made sure, and my wife, that we could walk the distances. I walk around town, but I never walk more than a few miles at a time. I ride a bike a lot. But what we did was we loaded up our packs. Well, we started just by doing some long walks in the countryside. So I'm very lucky that I live on the edge of some wide open farmland that's very hilly. And we just started doing longer and longer walks, anywhere from 5 to 10 miles longer. Then we donned our packs. And the Sunday before a few days before we left, we walked about 10 miles, 12 miles with our full packs and felt good, always checking out our gear. I recommend anyone who's planned on doing long treks, make sure you practice and train beforehand with your equipment. And by the way, your feet are your major equipment, and whatever you're wearing on your feet, because I met way too many people in Spain who had intended to walk long distances and got injured or hurt or spent a lot of days resting because of blisters or sprains or something like that, because they didn't train enough. So better to practice and know what you're doing and what you're getting into before you spend all that money to fly somewhere and spend all that money on lodging and have great plans for walking.
Russ?
Yes, Christine.
Yeah, about the shoes. Were the shoes so great that you stayed in the same shoes, or did you have to switch out the shoes with the amount of hiking you were doing?
No, I actually had a pair of hiking shoes and I had my sandals, and as much as possible, I wore the sandals. I wore the hiking shoes the 2 days that we were walking over through forest and over the mountains in some rougher terrain where the roads were quite gravelly and slippery. And I thought that the shoes might just give me a little extra support walking through there. Otherwise, we walked in sandals the whole time. One of the great things about walking in sandals is that when you get blisters have to do with how much of your foot is in contact with your boot or your shoe. And if you've got a boot and a shoe, those are all places that you can get blisters. With sandals, there's just a very few places that your foot actually contacts the sandal strap. And also your foot stays drier. It's a combination of contact rubbing and moisture in your foot, because your foot generates moisture, sweat as you're walking. Those two things together are what create blisters. And so I learned the hard way. I actually got some small blisters on the Camino. I managed to take care of them right away, so they healed up quickly and didn't stop me. But that's when I discovered trekking in sandals, and I'm a confirmed sandal trekker now. We got about 1 more minute because I love to talk about this. I'll entertain one more question.
Do more, please. Lots of countries, more the better. We're sitting on our couches. We want to see the world.
Okay, well, this is great. Well, the places I've hiked the most besides this are Switzerland and the UK, Scotland, and Ireland. And my favorite way to get around is by foot. My second favorite way to get around is by bicycle. And those are all quite doable in those countries. And it's what I call slow travel. You slow down and you see and get to know things. If you're from the US, you know that it's hard to do that here because of our roads. It's much easier to do that in Europe or other places. And of course, my favorite thing is you'll find out is to stop around noon or early afternoon for some tea and scones, just a little something to keep you going along the way. So, and you don't get that here. Well, you've been a great group. Thanks everyone for being my beta testers and seeing how the show goes. And next time I'll remember to say at the very outset that I went in the fall of 2019. So you won't wonder, when was he walking there? Why are the grapes so ripe? We thought he went there in early spring. So anyway, come back to get set up. I'll be doing more travel series and also being inviting in guests to talk about some slow travel and other things. Hopefully we'll start doing a lot more travel when the world feels safer for our health. Until then, we'll have to just imagine it or live with our memories or photographs. So I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Thanks, Narelle, for joining in all the way from Australia.
It was good.
And Diana from Italy. Great to see you.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Russ.
Bye, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Ron.
Hi, Nikki. Take care.
Bye, Chris. Good to see you.
Nice. Russ, can I ask a question about your microphone?
Yes.
So I've had issues with my mic. So do you have a PC or an Apple?
I have an Apple.
Okay, then I won't even
I'm
bother.
using the Samsung. I forget the number of it.
Yeah.
What it is.
Okay.
But,
yeah, I have someone. I'm going to do a Zoom call with someone, try and figure out why mine isn't working. But thank you so much. This was fabulous.
You're welcome. Thanks, Christine. We'll see everyone. Bye.
See you from the other side of the world here.